Computer motherboard, the main board of the computer. There are two types of motherboard can identify. The mainly AT and ATX, the two technologies. The AT means advanced technology, ATX means advanced technology extended. According to the form factor of the motherboard, these two categories are available. So when you come to the AT motherboard, the main difference is the power connectors and the power interface on the motherboard. The power connectors, there are two types in AT boards, P9 power connector and the P8 power connector. To work properly, both two the connectors are to be plugged on to the motherboard properly. So to plug on these two connectors, there is the interface or power connector on the motherboard. So those two are connected with correct for the correct way of that plugging is very important. So these two connectors P8 and P9 are in place in properly, then only the motherboard can receive the power. There is no any other connectors such as like ATX motherboards. Only one connector only those two connectors are plugged into the machine is sufficient to get the power to the motherboard from the power supply unit. And the AT power supply units, when you talk about that, the power supply units is having a separate switch to switch on the power supply. It's a physical switch. When you press on that physical switch, only can switch on the power supply unit. But ATX is different than this because there is no any the switch, particular power switch to switch on that ATX machine. It is enabled with the software. It's enabled to the software base, so you can switch on that from the software base. Right. That is also the main difference between the AT and ATX, the power supply units. When you get some pictures, the motherboard here is the unique motherboard inbuilt power supply with AT P1 and P2 connectors. You can see that here the power connector in the motherboard interface is look like this. The P1 P2 connectors should be plugged into the particular interface. Or when you come to the AT motherboard, there are the all type of components are available on this motherboard. So generally, the motherboard architecture is very important, the factor to be concentrate. So when you think about the motherboard, when you design the motherboard, the architecture is very important. That architecture I will show you this a little bit later. Before that, I would introduce some of bus and as well as the chipsets and processors interfaces on this motherboard. Bus is what? Bus is the data path of the motherboard. The bus, there are many buses in this motherboard. ISA buses, industrial standard architecture buses. That buses are the old technology and the speed is very less. The next buses is PCI, peripheral component interconnector. Those buses are speeder than the ISA buses. So there is another AGP. You can see that the AGP bus is there. AGP is particularly for the graphic advanced graphic port. It is AGP. that is for graphic cards. The graphic cards means for the display. If you want to get the display, then that particular card should be plugged onto this AGP. PCI and VISA also can use for VGA, the graphic cards, but the AGP is faster than the ISA and PCI graphic cards or VGAs. So particularly these buses, ISA and PCI buses, use for what purposes? We can use for the interfaces, as interfaces for network, sound cards and VGA, so and so. Those days that of course like use for motherboards, the keyboard, and as well as the mouse, also directly connected with the ISA and PCI slots those days, but it is not actually it's currently, but the new latest boards are on board with the PS2 and PS2 mouse and the PS2 keyboard. Then the chipset. Chipset is very important component of the motherboard. Chipset is the master controller of the motherboard. If any component is connected, any buses connected into the motherboard or I/O, input and output interfaces, everything is identified by the connected to the directly to the chipset. The chipset is already introduced that particular ports, if required, to the processor to process the scenario. The socket 7 here processor socket is available. The socket 7 is a Pentium 1 processor. This can use this interface. So this machines is like, it might be more than 20-30 years before, so I guess. So and there is another chipset is here, can identify, is a cache. Cache is a memory. Cache is a memory. The fundamental memory types, cache. The fastest memory type is a cache. The cache, there are two types, L1 cache and L2 cache. L1 cache is inside the processor. It's a very faster, and as well as the L2 cache is available on the motherboard. Here, very hard to find like this particular separate chipset or ICs allocated like this as a cache. Now the existing latest motherboard, but it is showing that the cache memory is available here. So when you come to the memory, so another main memory type is the random access memory, RAM, and as well as ROM, read-only memory. The read-only memory, flash ROM, is available. Read-only memory is the inside the BIOS, basic input and output system. The BIOS are doing very vital role in this motherboard, because while the system is switched on, the BIOS is the main chipset, is boot up the motherboard. We call that the boot up the motherboard. So that means it helps to run the post program, power on self test program, which is already installed in the BIOS. According to the BIOS post program, the motherboard is power on and hand over after some sort of a process, hand over the operating system to run the computer to the processor, and as well as the RAM, and as well as the VGA. It might identify each and every units, every components are connected, it's live or not, and introduced to the processor. Ultimately, if there is any error, it might shows that error that the particular port, and after that display on the screen, visual display unit or monitor or whatever. So the memory, the RAM slots, there are two RAM slots exist in this all type of socket 7 processor motherboard. So one is DIMM, another one is a SIM. SIM is a single inline memory modules. It's all memory types. Actually, it's very hard to find in these days, even though the sample. DIMM's direct inline memory modules, that is advanced memory type that is still that being used. Though SIM is now, it's in all, and DIMMs are direct inline memory modules is used for the RAM slots, RAM cards. So that's the memory. So RAMs is a temporary memory. That means it's a volatile memory, and the ROM is permanent memory. It's a non-volatile memory. The volatile DIMMs is RAM is a volatile memory, and ROM is a non-volatile memory. Then in this motherboard there are some the small ICs can show that everywhere in the motherboard, but those days the controller chipset is divided the control system in several segments. For example, like if the memories need to handle, that is having a separate IC, integrated circuits. But currently it's the latest computer, the sophisticated boards are control that every segments by the chipset, but those days it's divided into several places. That is why that many chips ICs can identify here. And again the CMOS battery here, the battery which is given the keep live the clock, because motherboard there is a there is a CMOS chipset is there, CMOS chipset. The CMOS means again the small sort of a chipset. It is the amalgamate, means combined with the BIOS, the ROM, the BIOS, basic inline memory modules. Therefore, so while the post program is running, this CMOS interface you can visible while you're rebooting the machines. When you press that F2, most probably that is enabled with the F2 or delete, or sometimes F2N. So then you can see that your boot sequence or a CMOS setup, when you press that while you're rebooting the machines or power on the machine. So then there is a clock key here, that this battery is already here to keep that clock alive. And about the CMOS, the setup and how it fix it, it is having a separate presentation, so you can see on my channel. And IDE is an interface that is dedicated for connecting the external storage, particularly hard disk and the CD-ROM drive. So those days it's not available SATA technology, it's not developed. Therefore IDE is the media to interconnected between the hard disks and the floppy disks. There are two IDE interfaces are there. These pins, 40 pins, are available in these IDE connectors. The floppy also another type of external storage, like it's the old type. Now it is completely unavailable. That is having again the floppy interface, that the floppy cables and the IDE cables are connected separately for IDE and floppies interfaces. And the parallel ports is for printers. Parallel ports for printers are available So that is also like a pin type parallel ports those days used. And serial ports are here, COM ports. Serial ports used for particularly communication purposes, like sometimes Cisco routers or router configurations we can connect it to this. USBs, Universal Serial Bus, is available, but it's having a some pin. For this is we can use for connected to the USB drives. And here keyboard, it's very old type of interface for the keyboard. And I like to find that the switch, means power switch, it might be not very clear enough for me in this board. Therefore then I will show you that power switch, how it is available, because the power switch is the important when you plug the motherboard without any plug into the direct the power switch. So we can use to switch on the machine, but this is a AT motherboard, advanced technology motherboard. The power is as I mentioned, it is a direct physical switch. There is no any onboard switches are available. So I just briefly discussed a lot, and also here the capacitors. The capacitors can spread everywhere on this motherboard, the small and as well as the large capacitors. Capacitors for what? Capacitors are retained power. That means the voltage. The voltage is retained in these capacitors and controlled before moving to the devices or interfaces. Because for example, like a processor required 12 volts, not more than that, not less than that. The capacitors just close to the processor is handled by the voltage of the processor. If there is a voltage fluctuations, it's obvious that the fluctuations of the voltage in the motherboard or a power supply units in the several circumstances. So then this capacitors is only allowed to move to the processor 12 volts. So that is why these capacitors are very crucial elements in this motherboard. And also you can see that another the component should look like coiled structure here. It is not the sophisticated machines are not much visible, but this is very clearly two coiled structures are there. When you deal with the voltage in this motherboard, the voltage, while you are moving the voltage, it is a phenomena, it's a natural phenomena producing the electromagnetic interference while the voltage is moving one phase to another place. So therefore that interference, the electromagnetic interference, might affected to the data. The data means zeros and one, plus voltage and the zero voltage. Then it might change that the 0 to 1 or 1 to 0. It might huge effect to the data stream. So therefore this electromagnetic interference were produced by the voltage absorbed by this two coil structure. Right. So then we'll just move forward to the another type of motherboard. Here it's the P1 P2 connector, the power connectors. You can see that the power connectors, how they are connected onto the motherboard. Right, the same structures. And okay, this is very close ATX power connectors, and the same thing. Right, another motherboard, the AT type. I'm just brief on that, like very quickly. We can identify BIOS here and ISA slots, very high amount of ISA slots. That means this machine is very old machine. The CIS is the chipset, and also, but I need to mention The chipsets, there are two types. I said north bridge and south bridge. I just need to highlight here the chipset is there are two types, the north bridge and the south bridge. North bridge is very close to the processor socket. The south bridge is it's a bit far away from that. The chipset, the main chipset, we call that the north bridge, and the north bridge and the south bridge interconnected with the buses. So in this motherboard also can see that the north bridge and the south bridge, and here the processor is already plugged onto the socket, and there is the fan, because cooling fan is there. Below the cooling fan is directly connected to the heat sink. Heat sink is what? Heat sink is the metal surface where which is used to absorb the heat from the produced by the processor. Sometimes this heat sink is required. The latest motherboards, the heat sink is fixed to the north bridge and south bridge as well, because they also having a heavy work, and the chipsets might be having more heat that absorbed by this particular heat sink. So just move forward that from this ATX motherboard, yes, very clearly you can see that how it connected. Right, P8 and P9. Another ATX motherboard, it's VIA chipset. There are different chipset vendors are there. SIS, I show you that early. Now this is a VIA chipset. Because chipset is very important component, therefore the chipset vendor also very important. That those days it's very popular, the VIA and SIS, and as well as the Intel and AMD. Those are the chipsets. It's very popular, but Intel is in the first place when it comes to the chipset and as well as the processor too. Intel motherboards are used by Intel chipsets. Now in this one, PCI slots here, ISA slots here, the north bridge here, it's very close to the processor slot, and this is a processor 7, means that is also Pentium 7 and Pentium 1, and here AGP connector is there. Here IDE connectors are there, the floppy disk connector. Here this is the very important motherboard, because this is a hybrid motherboard. Hybrid means what? This is having AT and ATX both technologies. This is a hybrid. Very rare to find this board even for demonstration and currently. Right? So this hybrid. So other chipsets are there, and here DIMMs and SIMs also available. Okay, now just to move forward to the AT technology. When you come to the AT, right? So here it's the AT motherboard. Before just I explain this AT, I like to show you the yes, AT power unit. The AT power unit is look like this. It is a single connector with 20 pins. This is not P1, P9, P8 and P9. This is a single unit, 20 pins. And there are two types of ATX technology power connectors. That is 20 and 24. The both the 20 means like a bit the old types of motherboards used by this 20, and the latest motherboard I category motherboards are being used to the 20 plus 4. Another 4 is having here additionally 24. I will show you that it's there in my presentation. Okay, this is the example of the ATX motherboard. Bit complicated because it is the sophisticated motherboard. Asus, this is the Asus motherboard. The motherboard is Asus. Here is the processor, microprocessor. socket. And here's the north bridge it shows, and this is south bridge. And north bridge and south bridge are covered by the heat sink. That is why it's black color heat sink is there. And the memory, it's yellow color. The memory, direct inline memory modules, DIMMs, that means DIMM slots to use for the RAMs. And this here IDE connectors and the floppy connectors are available in this motherboard also. That means they can use for the ID cable and the floppy cables for hard disk and the CD-ROM. And here is a 24-pin motherboard power connector. That is why we call this one is a ATX motherboard. That is why ATX. And here you can see that the coiled structure, as I said, like if there is any voltage, when you moving the voltage, there are some possibilities to produce the electromagnetic interference. So that absorbed by this coiled structure. And here CMOS battery is available. Right? And the many chipsets are here, but it is not much sophisticated because it is having the combinations of all technological interfaces, buses. But here there is no ISA buses are available, but PCI and AGP. PCI extender or AGP slot is available. It's the fastest graphic port which can use for VGA, visual display cards. And here there is a PCI Express slots here. PCI Express slots used for communication devices. And you can see that in this area I/O input and output connections. So sounds here and sounds here. After that universal serial bus USB interfaces are here, and as well as the LAN port or NIC network interface here. I will show you that in this one. And parallel port here for printers. Parallel port. Serial port is just down. We can it is not its view on this here, but however I will show you that one in different angle. Right, and yes, sometimes it might not very clear that the BIOS and the CMOS, but it is already available on this motherboard. We'll just move forward to the another motherboard or some connectors. We have already watched this one. And here, what is this? This is the power connector, the pins. So I'm going to say very important message on this here. This is the power connector in ATX, starting from 1, 12, 13 to 24. So that I told you that it's a 24 the pin connector and as well as a 20 pin connector. There are two types. So however, you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth row, it's having a green color pin. What it says, that is the voltage is a 5 voltage. It's very important because why? This green color is available to test the power supply. If you want to test the power supply, just take a jumper, means like a small piece of wire, and connect with this green color and this black color one, neutral one. So what happened? So if your power supply is plugged onto the separately plugged onto the power and switched on the power, after that connect with these two plus green and the black, then if the power supply is working, that fan is switched on. So that's the way that we are testing the ATX power supply is working or not. If the power supply is having issues, exactly, but if when you're connected these two, just to jump the click it, the connect it, then the power supply won't response or switch on it. So that is why it's very important. ATX motherboard power supply can test as this, but AT never do such testing as this. Here is the 20 pin and 24 connectors look like this. And again same thing, the 20 pin here, 24 separate, the 4 one is separate, it also might available, but however total altogether 24. Right, the same thing. Yes, no differences. Another new, the latest type of ATX motherboard. Now you know why I am saying the ATX, because when you look at to the power connector, you can see that it's a ATX type power connector, and memory slots is their RAM. You can identify the yellow color, and here is the processor socket is here, and north bridge is covered by the heatsink. The north bridge we can't see visible. Intel motherboard, this is, you can see that the chipset, it says Intel, therefore south bridge is open, and CMOS battery is here. PCI, peripheral component interface, white color, the buses are available, and here PCI Express slots, the small slots are here. Right, so but here the 12 volts connector, it's very important. ATX motherboard, there are two power connectors, ATX 20 pin or 24 pin connector, and separate power for the motherboard and the processor side, the voltage, another 12 voltage power connector is available. The very careful this when you plug in this one, these power connectors, because this there is the way of plugging, so that would be in a correct posture when you plug into the power. However, but you need to identify that there are two power connectors. Here's another types of all type of ATX motherboard, because it is available ISA also, and PCI and AGP, and as well as the RAM slots are here, the DIMMs for RAMs, and AGP here. So just roughly CMOS battery, and from here the processor, yes, it's inside here, processor, it's inside here, right, with confused motherboard, and north bridge and the south bridge can look like this, right? ATX, the all type one. Here is the input and output can visible, it's properly from the this view. Here PS2 mouse, PS2 keyboard, the green color is the mouse, the purple color is the PS keyboard, and here VGA, right, video graphic adapter, that means to monitor or other display, and there is another graphic adapter here in this board, is a bit different, DVI port. DVI is also dedicated for the display. This is used for projectors those days, but it is not much popular currently, but this is faster than the VGA technology. And the latest is the HDMI. HDMI is also the visual output to display, so it's the latest and the fastest graphic adapter. And here's the USBs are available here, and from here you can see the LAN adapter here. On top of the two USBs, the LAN adapter is here, and there is a SATA ports here. The SATA is used for the hard disks and the CD-ROMs, the external storages. Now it's IDE replaced by the SATA. IDE, those days used by IDE, now the SATA ports are here to use for the external storages. In this motherboard, then the next you can see that the sound ports, audio ports, the sound input, output, mic, you can see from here. Okay, here's another VTOL type of, it's very important one, because it is also hybrid one. Here you can see ATX and the AT, both power connectors are there, but it is a hybrid type of motherboard, but these days it's not available, those type of motherboard, but it's very rare to find to even demonstrate. Here is the ATX power supply, 4 pin and here it's the 4 pin for the 12 volts. This is 4 pin is for power supply for the hard disk and the CD-ROM, right, those days. But this now currently it's having a SATA power, not this power, SATA power for the SATA hard disk and the SATA CD-ROMs. And this is IDE CD-ROM and IDE hard disk, the power 4 pin power, and here 24 pin power supply. The power connector is available. This is also, but it's bit the old type of the power supply unit. When you come to the power supply, so how to select that the most appropriate power supply unit? The power supply, when you think about that, the watt of the power supply is very important. So because the power, the consumption, the level of the motherboard is measured by the power source is produced by the power supply. It is the mainly, technically it says the watt, W. So those days power supplies like AT machines used just below the 200 watt, but the sophisticated latest machines required more than 800 or more than 1000 watt power supplies to fulfill all the requirements of the motherboard. So it's very important when you're considering the power supply and when you buy the casings along with the power supply. Right, here are the connectors that which I have mentioned and over this presentation. And of course, like this is also the latest, but not much. The motherboard, it's available. What all the components, especially you can identify the ATX power connector. ATX power connector. Right. I just need to tell about something, the architecture of the motherboard, very briefly. The architecture of the motherboard architecture, it is depend on the exactly the chipsets. Here just get some idea, like, because the PCI buses are here, north bridge here, south bridge here. The north bridge, you know, like north chipset, north bridge, and the south bridge. The CPU, the processor, directly connected to the north bridge, and AGP is directly connected, advanced graphic port, like video adapters connected the north bridge, and the RAM is directly connected to the north bridge. And L2 cache, I have mentioned that it's the cache which are available on the motherboard is directly connected to the north bridge. Then very important, the crucial to the operations this north bridge, because those very important parts are directly connected to the north bridge. That is why north bridges might have some overheat. To control this overheat, we require to have a fan or heat sink on top of that. Then the other bus is the north bridge. Other chipset is the north bridge. North bridge is connected to that the I/O devices particularly, and as well as the ISA buses. That is why IS buses are very slow, because PCI buses directly connect to the north bridge, but ISA buses connect to the south bridge, and after that to the north bridge. If the operation how could happen is like this processor required to data from any device from outside, it is get from the north bridge, so it's provided by the north bridge. So if ISA having some device, the path is bit long, it will take more time. PCI is very faster because it is directly connected to the north bridge. That is the way that it's the speeds of the motherboard is dependent on the several factors. The one is the technology. One is the technology, architecture of the motherboard. Right. And the other factors, if you're just to brief it, like cache memory in this processor, cache L1 and cache memory on the motherboard. And not only that, the bus speeds of the motherboard and the RAM capacity of the RAM is also directly involved with the speeds of the motherboard. So when you come to the next point, here it's the general, again, the format, the architecture of the motherboard. The PCI buses are here, and this is with all the structure of the motherboard, this one, but I'm not much interested on that one, so I'll take to another very important one. Right, this is just to a brief. If I look at this one, actually you can see that here it's a BIOS chipset, or a SIM BIOS chipset is here, and here is a SATA port, and here in this here ATX power connector, and here IDE connectors. Intel chipset is here. It's a CMOS battery. So, but you can identify any components which are available on any motherboards, because it's a factory, it's the same format. Here okay, I just the bus architecture is now I'm going to show you. Yes, again another type of bus architecture, but general command for bus architecture I like to show from here. Some examples are here. I might be, yeah, I'll get back here from the motherboard. You see that those are the motherboards. Right. I hope. Okay. Yeah, it's here in the chipset. All right. So we can see that. This is general format. So if we need to study the general format, then you can just apply for others as well. The here north bridge and the south bridge. This connected to the north bridge, the CPU processor, and the PCI slots and other DIMMs, RAMs, right? It's connected to this one. And south bridge, it's USB, the COM port, LPT printer ports, keyboard, like other types of devices are connected to the north bridge. That is general structure we should just study on here. So we'll look at that another a bit complicated, like, but however it's the same, nothing. So all the devices there where it's separately connected. It's this one. So motherboard speed is depend on that the speed of the buses. That is general scenario. Here it's look nice. The same. It's very easily understanding these structures. Then the motherboard having a particular like this pre-designed structure. So that is motherboard designers are designed this one. So to identify the how it look and how that those connectors are connecting to the motherboard, connected to each other. Right. So I just to have some brief. I identified from this is very quite interesting. The difference between AT and ATX. I already mentioned that most of points. Just to brief on that one. AT having a separate switch to switch on, but ATX having a software enabled power on system, and P9 and P8 the connectors are available on ATX, but here 20 and 24 pin connectors are available ATX, and the watt or wattage is 250 or less the power supply, but here it's more than 300, it's 400, but it's all the now latest wattage is 1000 or over 1000. Right, so those are the points that difference can identify the AT and ATX technology. So however, just I have given like a brief introduction about the AT and ATX motherboard. So thank you very much.